The worst day of my life started with a knock on my door at 7 in the morning, and when I opened it, Patricia Whitmore stood there with her clipboard, and that expression I had come to hate over the past 6 months. "James Yates," she said, tapping her pen against the board. "I'm here to inform you that your violations have exceeded the maximum allowable threshold. The HOA board has voted unanimously to begin foreclosure proceedings on your property." I stood there in my sweatpants and old college shirt, coffee mug halfway to my lips, trying to process what she had just said. "Foreclosure? Patricia, what are you talking about?" She flipped through papers on her clipboard with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Your mailbox is the wrong shade of black. You've parked your work truck in your driveway overnight on 17 separate occasions. Your lawn exceeded the 2-inch height limit 3 times this summer. And just last week, you failed to remove your trash cans from the curb within the required 4-hour window after pickup. Those are insane reasons to foreclose on someone's home," I said, feeling my grip tighten on the mug. "I've paid every fine you've sent me." "The fines are separate from the violation count," Patricia said, her voice taking on that condescending tone she used whenever she explained HOA rules. "According to the bylaws of Meadowbrook Heights, any homeowner who accumulates more than 15 violations in a calendar year is subject to foreclosure proceedings. You're at 23. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was my home. I had bought this 3-bedroom house in Scottsdale, Arizona, 2 years ago after saving for nearly a decade. I ran a small electrical contracting business, and this place represented everything I had worked for. Patricia, please, let me talk to the board. I'll fix everything. I'll repaint the mailbox today." She smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. "The vote has already been taken. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, or we will proceed with legal action. My husband's law firm will be handling the case, so I suggest you don't waste money on an attorney. Marcus knows every judge in Maricopa County. Marcus Whitmore, of course. Patricia's husband ran one of the most successful commercial litigation firms in Scottsdale, specializing in property law. He also sat on the HOA board as treasurer, which seemed like a massive conflict of interest, but apparently nobody cared about that. "This can't be legal," I said. "You can't just take someone's house over a mailbox color. Read your HOA agreement, James. You signed it when you purchased the property. The rules are quite clear." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and remove that truck from the driveway by tonight, or that's violation number 24. I watched her walk back to her pristine white Mercedes, parked perfectly in her driveway 3 houses down. Patricia Whitmore had been HOA president for 4 years, and in that time, she had transformed Meadowbrook Heights from a pleasant suburban neighborhood into something resembling a minimum security prison. Every blade of grass was monitored. Every paint choice required approval. Every minor deviation from her vision resulted in fines and violations. I went back inside and called my lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who had helped me set up my LLC. He listened to everything, asked me to email him copies of all the violation notices, and told me he would look into it. 3 days later, he called me back. "James, I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. The HOA agreement you signed is airtight. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were doing." "Let me guess. Marcus Whitmore wrote it. His firm, yes. Look, technically they can do this. The violation threshold is buried in Section 47 of the bylaws, but it's there. You did sign it." I sat down heavily on my couch. "So what do I do? Fight it. We can argue that the violations are trivial and that foreclosure is a disproportionate remedy. But James, I need to be honest with you. Marcus Whitmore has a reputation. He wins these cases, and if his wife is the one pushing this, he's going to come at you hard. How much is this going to cost me? Robert was quiet for a moment. To fight this properly. Probably 30,000, maybe more, and that's if we don't go to trial. I didn't have 30,000 in cash sitting around. My business was doing well, but I reinvested most of the profits into equipment and paying my 3 employees. I had maybe 10,000 in savings. I'll figure something out, I said. Over the next week, I started asking questions around the neighborhood. I learned that I wasn't the first person Patricia had targeted. An older couple 2 streets over had been forced to sell their home last year after accumulating violations for having a garden gnome in their front yard and painting their door the wrong shade of red. A single mother on the corner had been fined thousands of dollars for parking violations until she finally gave up and moved out. Nobody stood up to Patricia because nobody wanted to become her next target. The HOA board consisted of 5 people, Patricia as president, Marcus as treasurer, and 3 other neighbors who apparently just nodded along with whatever Patricia wanted. One of them, a retired dentist named Donald Harper, lived next door to me. I decided to talk to him. I found Donald washing his car on Saturday morning, which was the only approved day for washing cars in driveways according to HOA rules. "Donald, can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked uncomfortable immediately. "If this is about the foreclosure, James, I can't really discuss ongoing board matters. I'm not asking you to break any rules. I just want to understand why. What did I do that was so terrible that I deserve to lose my home?" Donald stopped scrubbing and looked around, as if checking whether Patricia might be watching. "Look, I tried to vote against it, but Patricia and Marcus have 3 votes locked down. Mine doesn't matter." "Who are the other 2? Rebecca Chen and Michael Foster." "They both moved here about a year ago, right after Patricia got them positions on the board. They vote however she tells them to vote. So Patricia has complete control. Pretty much." Donald lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think she's trying to force you out because she has a buyer lined up. Someone told me she has a cousin who wants to buy in the neighborhood, but there are no houses available. If your place goes to foreclosure, the HOA takes possession and can sell it to whoever they want." That made a sick kind of sense. This was never about violations. This was about Patricia wanting my house for someone else. "Thanks for telling me," I said. That night, I sat in my home office and started researching everything I could about HOA law in Arizona. I read through cases, statutes, and legal blogs until my eyes burned. Most of what I found confirmed what Robert had told me. HOAs in Arizona had broad powers, and courts generally upheld their authority as long as they followed their own bylaws. But I also found something interesting. If an HOA board member had a financial interest in a decision, that was considered a conflict of interest and could potentially void the decision. Marcus was Patricia's husband, and if Donald was right about Patricia having a buyer lined up, that could be the angle I needed. I called Robert the next morning. "I need you to investigate whether Patricia Whitmore has any financial connection to someone who wants to buy my house. That's going to require hiring a private investigator. That's more money, James. Do it. I'll find the money somewhere." I started liquidating everything I could. I sold my boat, which I had barely used anyway. I sold my motorcycle. I took out a loan against my truck. Within 2 weeks, I had scraped together enough to pay Robert's retainer and hire the investigator. Meanwhile, the 30-day deadline was approaching. Patricia sent me daily emails reminding me of the countdown. Each one felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The investigator's name was Linda Torres, and she was good at her job. Within a week, She came back with a file that made me want to punch something. Patricia Whitmore's cousin, Jennifer Hartley, submitted a written offer to the HOA board 3 months ago expressing interest in purchasing any property that became available in Meadowbrook Heights, Linda said, showing me the documents. The offer was for $20,000 over market value, and it specifically mentioned your address as a property of interest. 3 months ago. That was before most of my violations. Exactly. And look at this. She pulled out another document. Patricia is listed as a co-signer on Jennifer's mortgage pre-approval. She has a direct financial interest in this sale happening. I felt hope for the first time in weeks. This is it. This proves conflict of interest. Robert agreed. We filed an emergency motion with the court, arguing that the foreclosure decision was invalid due to Patricia's undisclosed financial interest. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days before my 30-day deadline expired. Patricia's response was swift and vicious. Marcus filed a counter-motion calling our allegations baseless and defamatory. He also filed a separate lawsuit against me personally for harassment and damage to Patricia's reputation. It was clearly meant to intimidate me, and it almost worked. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through everything in my head, wondering if I had enough evidence, if the judge would even care, if I was about to lose everything I had worked for. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Sarah Martinez presided, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Marcus Whitmore sat at the opposing counsel's table, looking confident in an expensive suit. Patricia sat behind him in the gallery, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Robert presented our case methodically. He walked through the timeline, showed the documents Linda had uncovered, and argued that Patricia's financial interest in Jennifer Hartley's offer created an insurmountable conflict of interest that violated Arizona HOA law. Marcus's response was smooth and practiced. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore's cousin expressing interest in purchasing a property is not a financial interest. Mrs. Whitmore is not receiving any money from this transaction. The co-signing of a mortgage application is simply a family member helping another family member. It has nothing to do with the legitimate violations that Mr. Yates has accumulated. But she didn't disclose this relationship to the board or to Mr. Yates, Robert countered. Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1813 requires HOA board members to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. Mrs. Whitmore actively concealed her connection to a party who stood to benefit from this foreclosure. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, did your wife disclose her cousin's interest in purchasing Mr. Yates's property to the other board members before they voted on the foreclosure? Marcus didn't miss a beat. Your Honor, there was nothing to disclose. My wife's cousin expressing interest in buying a home in the neighborhood is not relevant to whether Mr. Yates violated the HOA bylaws, which he clearly did. That's for me to decide, Judge Martinez said coolly. I'm asking whether the disclosure was made. The other board members were aware that Jennifer Hartley had expressed general interest in the neighborhood, Marcus said carefully. Were they aware that she specifically mentioned Mr. Yates's property in her offer? Were they aware that Mrs. Whitmore co-signed her mortgage application? Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second. I would need to check the meeting minutes. Judge Martinez looked at Patricia. Mrs. Whitmore, you're present in this courtroom. Did you disclose to the board that your cousin specifically wanted Mr. Yates's property and that you had co-signed her mortgage? Patricia stood up, her face flushed. Your Honor, I don't appreciate the insinuation that I did anything wrong. I have served this community faithfully for 4 years. Mr. Yates is a repeat violator who has shown complete disregard for the rules that the rest of us follow. My family connections are irrelevant. Answer the question, Mrs. Whitmore. Did you make that disclosure? Yes or no? Patricia's jaw tightened. The board knew Jennifer was interested in the neighborhood. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched out. Finally, Patricia said, No, I did not specifically disclose those details. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. I'm granting Mr. Yates's emergency motion. The foreclosure proceedings are stayed pending a full hearing on the conflict of interest allegations. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA board to suspend any enforcement actions against Mr. Yates until this matter is resolved. We'll reconvene in 30 days. I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to keep me in my home while we fought this out. As we left the courtroom, Patricia walked past me, leaning in close enough that only I could hear. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. My husband is going to destroy you in court, and when we're done, you'll lose everything, not just your house. Everything. Her words echoed in my head for days. I knew she wasn't bluffing. Marcus had resources I couldn't match. He could drag this case out for months, maybe years, bleeding me dry with legal fees until I had no choice but to give up. I needed a different approach. I needed leverage. That's when I started digging into Marcus's business. Whitmore and Associates had offices in a building on Scottsdale Road, a nice mid-rise in the heart of the downtown area. According to public records, Marcus didn't own the building. He leased the entire third floor from a property management company called Sandstone Holdings. I looked into Sandstone Holdings. It was a small company that owned 3 commercial properties in the Scottsdale area. The principal owner was a man named Arthur Brennan, who was 76 years old according to the corporate filings. On a hunch, I called Linda Torres again. I need you to find out everything you can about Arthur Brennan and Sandstone Holdings. What am I looking for? I don't know yet. Just anything that might be useful. Linda called me back 3 days later. Arthur Brennan has health issues. He had a major stroke last year and has been in assisted living ever since. His daughter, Monica Brennan, has power of attorney and has been managing his affairs, including Sandstone Holdings. Has she been selling off assets? Not yet, but there are rumors in the commercial real estate community that she's looking to liquidate. She lives in Boston and doesn't want to deal with managing properties in Arizona long term. An idea started forming in my head. It was crazy and would require every dollar I could scrape together, but it might work. I spent the next week putting together a financial plan. I met with 3 different banks, got quotes from commercial lenders, and even talked to a few private investors I knew through my business. The numbers were terrifying, but they were possible. Then I reached out to Monica Brennan directly. We met at a coffee shop in Old Town Scottsdale. Monica was in her late 40s, dressed in business casual, with the tired eyes of someone managing too many responsibilities. I explained who I was and what I wanted. You want to buy the building on Scottsdale Road? She asked, surprised. I haven't even listed it yet. I know. That's why I'm here. I want to make you an offer before it goes on the market. Why? I decided to be honest. Because one of your tenants is making my life hell and I want to be his landlord instead of the other way around. Monica laughed. That's the most honest answer I've heard in a real estate negotiation. Which tenant? Whitmore and Associates. 3rd floor. Her expression changed slightly. Marcus Whitmore. I've dealt with him. He's demanding. That's a polite way to put it. We talked for 2 hours. I explained my situation and Monica understood immediately. She told me about the headaches of managing the property from across the country, the complaints from Marcus about every little thing, the hassle of coordinating with the property management company. "If I sold to you, what would you do with it?" she asked. "Keep the current tenants in place, at least initially. Manage it myself or hire a local company. Maybe eventually expand my own business into one of the spaces." "Marcus's lease is up for renewal in 6 months," Monica said. "That's actually one of the reasons I've been thinking about selling. He wants to renegotiate the terms, wants a longer lease at a lower rate. I don't want to deal with that negotiation from Boston." "What if you didn't have to? What if you sold it to me and I dealt with Marcus?" Monica smiled. "I like the way you think. Let me get the building appraised and we'll talk numbers." The appraisal came back at $2.7 million. It was more than I had hoped, but Monica was motivated to sell. After some negotiation, we agreed on $2.5 million. I would put down 20% and finance the rest through a commercial loan. The down payment was $500,000. I didn't have it. I went back to every bank, every lender, every investor I knew. I refinanced my business. I brought in a partner who bought a 30% stake in my company for $200,000. I maxed out every line of credit I had. My accountant told me I was insane. Robert told me I was taking a huge risk. My mother, when I called her in Ohio to explain what I was doing, asked me if I had lost my mind. But I could see the finish line. I could see the look on Patricia's face when she realized what I had done. It took 6 weeks to pull the funding together. There were moments I thought it would fall apart, loans that almost didn't go through, investors who backed out at the last minute. But finally, on a Wednesday morning in October, I sat in a title company office and signed more documents than I thought possible. I owned a commercial building in downtown Scottsdale. More importantly, I was now Marcus Whitmore's landlord. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted to wait for the right moment. That moment came 2 weeks later when the court hearing on the conflict of interest allegations was scheduled. Marcus came into the courtroom looking as confident as ever. He had filed a motion to dismiss based on some technical legal argument about standing and proper jurisdiction. Patricia sat behind him, and this time Jennifer Hartley was there too, a blonde woman in her 30s who kept shooting me hostile looks. Judge Martinez heard arguments from both sides, then asked Marcus directly about the timeline of events. "When did Jennifer first express interest in my property? When did Patricia co-sign the mortgage application? When did the HOA board start documenting violations against me?" Marcus tried to dance around the questions, but Robert had done his homework. We had documentation showing that my violation notices had increased dramatically in the 3 months after Jennifer's offer to the HOA board. Before that, I had received maybe 1 or 2 minor notices. After her offer, I was getting 2 or 3 violations per week. "This pattern suggests targeted enforcement," Judge Martinez said. "Mrs. Whitmore, as HOA president, you have discretion over which violations to pursue. The evidence suggests you used that discretion to manufacture a justification for foreclosure so your cousin could purchase Mr. Yates's property." "That's not true," Patricia burst out. "He violated the rules. I was just enforcing them. By measuring his grass with a ruler. By documenting the exact shade of black on his mailbox. By noting the minute his trash cans were returned to storage." Judge Martinez shook her head. "This goes beyond reasonable enforcement. This is harassment with a financial motive." Marcus stood up. "Your Honor, even if there were some irregularities in the process, the underlying violations are real. Mr. Yates did violate the HOA bylaws. Violations that would normally result in minor fines, not foreclosure," Judge Martinez said. "And certainly not when the person enforcing them has a hidden financial interest in the outcome. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Yates. The foreclosure proceedings are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to refund all fines paid by Mr. Yates related to these violations, and I'm awarding him attorney's fees. I felt a wave of relief so powerful I almost collapsed. I had won. My home was safe. Patricia looked like she wanted to murder someone. Marcus's face had gone red, and he was whispering urgently to his client. Jennifer Hartley had tears running down her face. As we left the courtroom, Marcus pulled me aside. "Don't think this is over, Yates. I'll find another way to make your life miserable. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I smiled at him. "Actually, Marcus, I think you're the one who doesn't know who you're dealing with. By the way, we need to talk about your lease." His expression changed from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about? Your lease at Scottsdale Road. It's up for renewal in 4 months. I wanted to discuss the new terms with you." "Why would you discuss my lease? You don't have anything to do with that building." I pulled out my phone and showed him the deed transfer document. "Actually, as of 2 weeks ago, I own that building, which makes me your landlord." The color drained from Marcus's face. Patricia had walked up behind him and heard everything. She grabbed the phone from my hand, staring at the document. "This is fake," she said, but her voice wavered. "Feel free to check with the county recorder's office. It's all public record." Marcus's voice came out strangled. "You bought the building." "I did. And you know what's interesting? I was reviewing all the leases yesterday, and I noticed yours is month to month for the next 4 months until the renewal date. That's not a lot of security for a law firm." "You can't kick me out. I have a lease." "I'm not going to kick you out, Marcus. That would be petty. No, I'm just going to adjust your rent to reflect current market rates. I had an appraiser come through last week, and he told me you're paying about 40% below market value for that space. So when your lease comes up for renewal, I'll be offering you new terms at market rate." "That will triple my rent," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Actually, it will be a little more than triple. Plus, I'm going to require a longer lease term for the lower rate, say 5 years, or you can go month to month at an even higher premium. Your choice." Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. "You spiteful little man. You bought a building just to get revenge on us." "No, Patricia. I bought a building because it's a good investment. The fact that it happens to give me leverage over your husband is just a bonus. Kind of like how you tried to steal my house to help your cousin, except my way is actually legal." Marcus looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He grabbed Patricia's arm and pulled her toward the exit. I turned to Robert, who was trying hard not to laugh. "Was that too much?" "That was perfect," he said. "But you know they're going to try something. Let them try. I'm ready this time." Over the next few weeks, things got interesting. Marcus tried to find another office space in Scottsdale, but the market was tight and expensive. Every place he looked at was either too small, too expensive, or had issues that made it unsuitable for a law firm. He eventually came back to me asking about the renewal terms. I had my attorney, Robert, handle the negotiation. I offered Marcus a 5-year lease at 3 times his current rate, with a clause that allowed me to terminate with 6 months' notice if he or his wife engaged in any legal action against me, or interfered with my property rights. It also included a personal guarantee from both Marcus and Patricia. Marcus tried to negotiate, but he didn't have much leverage. Moving his firm would cost hundreds of thousands in build-out costs, and he would lose his prestigious Scottsdale Road address. After 2 weeks of back and forth, he signed the new lease. The first month's rent check was for $18,000. I looked at it for a long time before depositing it. This single check was more than Patricia had tried to fine me over 6 months of bogus violations. But I wasn't done with Patricia yet. She was still HOA president, and she still had it out for me. I knew she would try something else eventually, so I decided to take a more proactive approach. I started attending HOA board meetings. In the past, I had ignored them, which had been a mistake. Now I showed up to every single one, took notes, and asked questions. I reviewed the HOA budget and found some interesting things. Patricia had been paying herself a salary as president. According to the bylaws, board members could be compensated for their work, but the amount was supposed to be reasonable. Patricia was paying herself $36,000 a year to be HOA president of a neighborhood with 72 homes. That worked out to $500 per home annually, which seemed excessive. I also found that the HOA had hired Patricia's brother's landscaping company to maintain the common areas, paying twice the market rate. The HOA had purchased a new sign for the neighborhood entrance from a company owned by Marcus's law partner. The list went on. I brought all of this to Donald Harper, who was still on the board. He looked at the documents I had compiled and whistled. "This is worse than I thought," he said. I knew Patricia was using the HOA as her personal piggy bank, but I didn't realize the extent of it. Can we remove her as president? We would need a majority vote of the homeowners. She has enough friends in the neighborhood that it would be hard. What if we had evidence of actual fraud? Donald looked at me carefully. "Do you have evidence of fraud?" "Not yet, but I'm going to find it." I hired Linda Torres again. This time, I asked her to do a complete financial investigation of Patricia's HOA activities over the past 4 years. Linda dove in with enthusiasm, subpoenaing bank records, interviewing vendors, and tracking every dollar that flowed through the HOA accounts. What she found was worse than I expected. Patricia had been embezzling money from the HOA reserve fund. She had created fake invoices for maintenance and repairs that never happened, then pocketed the money. Over 4 years, she had stolen nearly $80,000. "This is criminal fraud," Linda said, showing me the evidence. "You need to take this to the police." I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to handle this privately, to force Patricia to resign and pay the money back. But she had tried to take my home. She had made my life hell for months. She deserved to face the consequences of her actions. I took the evidence to the Scottsdale Police Department and filed a report. The detective who took my statement was a middle-aged man named Frank Morrison who looked bored until I showed him the financial documents. Then his expression sharpened. "This is pretty clear-cut," he said. HOA embezzlement cases are tricky because a lot of times it's just poor management, but this is blatant fraud. We'll open an investigation. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Patricia tried to stonewall the police, claiming the records were confused and that she had authorization for all the payments. But the evidence was overwhelming. Fake invoices with forged signatures, payments to shell companies she controlled, transfers from the reserve fund to her personal accounts. In January, the police arrested Patricia Whitmore at her home. The local news covered it with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for celebrity scandals. HOA president arrested for embezzlement ran on every channel. Marcus tried to use his legal connections to make it go away, but the evidence was too strong and the story was too public. Patricia was charged with 16 counts of fraud and embezzlement. Marcus hired the best criminal defense attorney in Phoenix, but it didn't matter. In March, faced with the mountain of evidence against her, Patricia took a plea deal. She pled guilty to 8 counts of fraud, agreed to pay full restitution, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The day of her sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and listened as the judge explained that people in positions of trust, who abuse that trust deserve punishment. Patricia cried and apologized, saying she had made mistakes and let the power go to her head. The judge wasn't sympathetic. You systematically defrauded your neighbors, people who trusted you to manage their community. You used your position to enrich yourself and to target anyone who stood in your way. You attempted to force Mr. Yates out of his home through harassment and abuse of process. Your actions were calculated and predatory. 2 years is lenient given the scope of your crimes. Patricia was led away in handcuffs. Marcus sat in the gallery, his face unreadable. When he left the courtroom, he didn't even look at me. The HOA held an emergency election for a new board. Donald Harper was elected president. He immediately began implementing reforms, including term limits, financial transparency requirements, and a complete rewrite of the enforcement procedures. The days of arbitrary violations and harassment were over. As for me, life got better. My electrical contracting business continued to grow, and I hired 2 more employees. The commercial building on Scottsdale Road turned out to be a great investment. Marcus paid his rent on time every month, though we never spoke directly. He communicated through his office manager, and I was fine with that. I used some of the rental income to make improvements to my house. I repainted the mailbox, not because Patricia had been right about the color, but because I wanted to. I planted new trees in the front yard. I even put up a small garden gnome by the front door, a private joke that made me smile every time I came home. The neighborhood changed after Patricia left. People were friendlier, less afraid. Block parties started happening again. Kids played in the streets without worrying about being reported for noise violations. It felt like a community instead of a police state. About 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I got a letter from Jennifer Hartley. She apologized for her role in everything, explaining that Patricia had manipulated her into thinking I was a problem neighbor who was bringing down property values. She said she had no idea Patricia was trying to force me out illegally, and that she felt terrible about the whole situation. I wrote back and told her I appreciated the apology. I also told her that if she was still interested in moving to Meadowbrook Heights, a house 2 streets over had just gone on the market. She ended up buying it, and we became friendly neighbors. It turned out she was a nice person when she wasn't being fed lies by her cousin. Marcus's lease renewal came up again after 5 years. By that time, the building had appreciated significantly in value, and I had multiple companies interested in leasing space. Marcus asked about renewing for another term, and I offered him reasonable rates, not the punitive ones from before. He signed without argument. I think he realized that holding grudges was expensive and exhausting. I never saw Patricia again after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she and Marcus got divorced while she was in prison. He moved to a different neighborhood in North Scottsdale. She moved somewhere back east after her release, trying to start over where nobody knew her story. Looking back on everything, I sometimes still can't believe how close I came to losing my home. If I had been less stubborn, if I hadn't been willing to fight, if I hadn't gotten lucky with the building purchase, things could have turned out very differently. But I also learned something important through the whole ordeal. Bullies rely on people being too afraid or too tired to stand up to them. Patricia had terrorized the neighborhood for years because nobody challenged her. Once someone finally did, her whole corrupt system fell apart. I also learned that revenge doesn't have to be petty or spiteful. Sometimes the best revenge is just success. I didn't ruin Marcus's business or try to destroy his reputation. I just became his landlord and charged him fair market rates. The fact that it tripled his overhead was just economics. The commercial building ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. Not just financially, though it did very well as an investment, but it taught me about property management, about commercial real estate, and about leveraging assets. I eventually bought 2 more buildings in the Scottsdale area, diversifying my income beyond just the electrical business. My employees benefited too. I was able to give them raises and better benefits because the business was more profitable with the additional income streams. 2 of them bought houses in the area, and I helped them navigate the HOA agreements to make sure they didn't have any hidden traps like mine had. Donald Harper turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He served for 3 years before stepping down and passing the role to another neighbor. Under his leadership, the HOA actually became useful instead of oppressive. They organized neighborhood events, maintained the common areas properly, and only enforced rules that actually mattered, like requiring people to maintain their properties and not create nuisances. The violation system was completely overhauled. Instead of fines and threats, the new system involved friendly notices and offers to help. If someone's lawn got too long because they were sick or dealing with a family emergency, neighbors volunteered to help instead of reporting them. It was revolutionary. I served on the board myself for a year, mostly to make sure the reform stuck. It was boring work, reviewing budgets and organizing meetings, but it was important. I wanted to make sure nobody like Patricia ever got control again. The legal fees from fighting the foreclosure were eventually paid back by the HOA's insurance as part of the settlement. The insurance company was not happy about Patricia's activities and dropped the HOA's coverage, forcing us to find a new provider. But the new insurance was actually cheaper because the provider felt confident that the board wasn't engaging in harassment anymore. I thought about writing about my experience, maybe posting it online or talking to a reporter. But in the end, I decided against it. The story was over, and Patricia had already faced consequences for her actions. Dragging it all up again would just be vindictive, and I was done with that chapter of my life. Instead, I focused on building my businesses and enjoying my home. I dated a woman named Sarah for a while, and though that didn't work out long term, we remained friends. I traveled more, taking trips to places I had always wanted to see but never made time for. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. The house in Meadowbrook Heights appreciated significantly in value over the years. By the time I had owned it for 10 years, it was worth nearly double what I had paid for it. People asked me occasionally if I would ever sell it, and I always said no. It was more than just an investment. It was the place I had fought to keep, the home I had refused to give up even when everyone told me I would lose. Every time I pulled into my driveway, past the mailbox that was now painted exactly the color I wanted, and looked at my house with its neat lawn and garden gnome, I felt satisfied. Not because I had beaten Patricia Whitmore, though that was part of it, but because I had stood up for myself and won. The neighborhood kids started using my driveway to practice basketball because I had installed a hoop over the garage. Their parents apologized the first time, worried I would be upset about the noise. I just laughed and told them it was fine. After years of Patricia's silent, sterile neighborhood, the sound of kids playing was a welcome change. I hired one of those kids, a teenager named Ryan, to help with yard work in the summers. He reminded me of myself at that age, eager to work and save money. I paid him well and taught him about electrical work when he showed interest. He ended up going to trade school and now works as an apprentice electrician at a different company. But I like to think I helped set him on that path. Marcus eventually moved his law firm to a different building. Not because I forced him out, but because his practice had evolved and he needed a different type of space. We handled the lease termination professionally, and he even thanked me for being a reasonable landlord. I think losing Patricia and facing the consequences of their actions had changed him. He seemed less arrogant, more thoughtful. I replaced his firm with a startup tech company that needed office space. They were young and energetic, and they paid rent on time without complaint. The building continued to be profitable, and I reinvested the earnings into improvements that attracted even better tenants. The electrical contracting business grew beyond what I had imagined. We started getting commercial contracts, working on new construction projects throughout the Phoenix metro area. I had to hire a project manager to help coordinate everything because I couldn't be everywhere at once. The business went from 3 employees to 15, and we were bidding on projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I bought my mother a condo in Mesa so she could spend winters in Arizona instead of freezing in Ohio. She was proud of what I had built, though she still occasionally reminded me that buying a commercial building to spite someone was crazy. I reminded her that it had worked out pretty well. On the 5-year anniversary of the day, Patricia had knocked on my door threatening foreclosure. I threw a party. Not a big celebration, just a barbecue in my backyard with neighbors and friends. Donald came, and so did several of the other neighbors who had been supportive during the whole ordeal. We ate burgers, drank beer, and told stories about the dark days of Patricia's reign. "I still can't believe you bought Marcus's building," Donald said, shaking his head. "That was bold." "It was stupid," I corrected. But sometimes stupid and bold look the same, and you don't know which it is until later. Well, it worked out, and you saved this neighborhood from a tyrant. That counts for something. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like someone who had fought for what was his and gotten lucky. But I accepted the compliment anyway. As the sun set that evening and my guests gradually left, I sat on my back patio and looked at my house. It needed a new roof soon, and the air conditioning unit was getting old. But it was mine, fully paid off now after years of aggressive payments. Nobody could take it from me. Not Patricia, not the HOA, not anyone. The garden gnome by my front door had become a neighborhood mascot. Other people started putting them in their yards, a small act of rebellion against the old regime. There were now 12 garden gnomes scattered throughout Meadowbrook Heights, each one a reminder that we controlled our own properties and our own lives. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering where she was and what she was doing. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, that she had figured out that controlling and manipulating people wasn't the path to happiness or fulfillment. But I didn't know, and ultimately, it wasn't my concern. She had made her choices and faced the consequences. My life wasn't perfect. Business had ups and downs. I still had occasional problems with tenants or contractors. I dealt with the normal stresses of running multiple enterprises and managing properties. But these were normal problems, the kind that everyone faces. They weren't existential threats to everything I had built. The story of my fight with the HOA became legendary in certain circles. Other people dealing with abusive HOAs reached out to me for advice. I helped when I could, connecting people with lawyers and investigators, explaining strategies that had worked for me. Some won their battles, some didn't. But they all appreciated someone who understood what they were going through. I never tried to buy another HOA president's building, though. That was a one-time thing, born of desperation and opportunity. I advised others to focus on legal remedies and organizing their fellow homeowners, not on elaborate revenge schemes. My situation had been unique, and I had been lucky. Counting on luck was a bad strategy. Years passed, and the memory of that terrible period started to fade. New families moved into Meadowbrook Heights, people who had never heard of Patricia Whitmore or the old HOA regime. They just knew it as a nice neighborhood with reasonable rules and friendly neighbors. That was how it should be. I eventually sold one of my commercial buildings at a significant profit and used the money to start a scholarship fund for trade school students in Arizona. I didn't name it after myself. I just wanted to help kids who were interested in electrical work, plumbing, carpentry, or other trades but couldn't afford the training. Education had given me options in life, and I wanted to provide that for others. The building on Scottsdale Road, Marcus's old building, I kept. It was steady income and well located. The tenant mix evolved over the years, but it remained fully leased and profitable. Every month when I reviewed the financial statements, I remembered that moment in the coffee shop when Monica Brennan had agreed to sell it to me, and how taking that risk had changed everything. My home in Meadowbrook Heights remained my anchor. No matter how busy I got with work or investments or other projects, I always came back to that 3-bedroom house with the perfect lawn and the wrong shade of black mailbox that was now exactly the shade I wanted. It represented security, but more than that, it represented the moment I had decided to fight instead of give in. I dated someone seriously for a while, a woman named Amanda who worked as a nurse. She moved in with me for 2 years and we talked about marriage. But ultimately, we wanted different things from life and we parted as friends. The house didn't feel empty after she left. It just felt like mine again. Some nights, sitting on my patio with a beer, I would think about alternate timelines. What if I hadn't fought the foreclosure? What if I hadn't hired an investigator? What if I hadn't taken the risk of buying the building? In those alternate timelines, I had probably lost my home, maybe lost my business, maybe left Arizona entirely to start over somewhere else. But in this timeline, the real one, I had stood my ground and won. I had turned a crisis into an opportunity. I had taken the weapon my enemy tried to use against me and turned it back on them, not through violence or cruelty, but through legal means and smart business decisions. The neighborhood around me thrived. Property values increased steadily. Crime was almost non-existent. People took pride in their homes and looked out for each other. The HOA maintained common areas and organized events, but otherwise stayed out of people's lives. It was everything a community should be. I thought about my younger self sometimes, the guy who had opened the door that morning to find Patricia standing there with her clipboard. He had been scared and angry and desperate. I wished I could tell him that it would all work out, that fighting back was the right choice, that everything he was about to go through would lead to something better. But he wouldn't have believed me anyway. Sometimes you have to live through the hard times to appreciate the good ones. As I approached the 10-year mark of owning my home, I had accomplished more than I ever thought possible. Multiple successful businesses, investment properties, financial security, and most importantly, peace. The constant stress of wondering what Patricia would complain about next was long gone, replaced by the normal concerns of running businesses and maintaining properties. I mentored several young business owners in the area, sharing lessons I had learned about contracts, negotiations, and standing up for yourself. I told them the story about Patricia and the HOA, though by now it had been refined through multiple tellings into a leaner, more dramatic version. They always reacted the same way, asking how I had the courage to buy the building when I was already financially stretched. The truth was, I hadn't felt courageous. I had felt desperate and angry and willing to take a huge risk because the alternative was losing everything anyway. Courage and desperation can look very similar from the outside. The electrical business eventually got big enough that I started thinking about succession planning. I didn't have kids, so the traditional family business path wasn't an option. Instead, I structured it so my senior employees could gradually buy equity, turning it into an employee-owned company over time. They had been loyal during the difficult years, and I wanted to reward that. The commercial properties I kept in my portfolio, managing them with the help of a professional property management company. I had learned that being a landlord was very different from being an electrician, and while I could do both, I did them better with help. My mother passed away peacefully in her sleep at 82, having spent her final winters in the Arizona sun. I inherited a small amount of money and a lot of photographs and memories. I used some of the money to endow the trade school scholarship fund more fully, ensuring it would continue long after I was gone. Life moved forward, as it always does. The drama with Patricia and Marcus became just another story, something that had happened in the past. New challenges emerged, new opportunities appeared, new problems needed solving. But I faced them all with the confidence of someone who had been tested and survived. The garden gnome by my front door started to wear out from years of sun exposure. I replaced it with a new one, exactly the same style. Some traditions were worth maintaining on quiet evenings. I sometimes walked through my neighborhood, looking at the houses and the people living their lives. Patricia had wanted to control all of this, to impose her vision and her rules on everyone. But she had failed, and the neighborhood was better for her failure. I passed by her old house, now owned by a young family with 3 kids. They had painted the front door bright red, something Patricia never would have allowed. Their lawn was neat but not obsessively manicured. Toys scattered the yard. It looked like a home instead of a museum display. That was the real victory, I realized. Not that I had kept my house, or bought a building, or sent Patricia to prison. The real victory was that people could live their lives without fear, could make their own choices about their property, could build homes instead of just maintaining house values. As I walked back to my own place that evening, the sun setting behind South Mountain in shades of orange and purple, I felt genuinely content. The journey from that terrible morning when Patricia had threatened foreclosure to this peaceful evening had been long and difficult and expensive. But it had been worth every dollar, every sleepless night, every moment of stress and fear, because in the end I had won. Not just the legal battle or the financial maneuvering, but something more important. I had proven to myself that I wouldn't be pushed around, that I could fight back when necessary, that I had the strength to stand up for what was mine. And every month, when Marcus's rent check arrived, I was reminded of exactly what standing up for yourself could accomplish.